As nations across the globe struggle to reduce their dependency on fossil fuels and search for alternative energy options, we turn our focus homeward. As we work as a community towards reducing our carbon footprint, how will it change our lives? What are the new clean green energy opportunities for our city and surrounding communities? And with all of the changes on the horizon, can Houston remain the energy capital of the world? I'm Ernie Manous, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight are Laura Spanjian, Director, Green Houston, City of Houston; David Hitchcock, Director, Sustainable Transportation Programs, Houston Advanced Research Center; and Craig Pirrong, Director, Global Energy Management Institute, Bauer College of Business, University of Houston. Welcome to you all. Now, in an attempt to follow up a show that we aired on Wednesday night that was called Earth, the Operator's Manual, that show ended focusing on Houston, saying how we are at the forefront of the future and all of this that's going on. We will get to all of that, but before we start, I want to get a clear, for people who didn't catch the show, understanding of what we're talking about. And and I'll start with you, Craig, about the difference between fossil fuels, renewable fuels. What are we talking about and what are they?
Well, fossil fuels are things like oil, natural gas, sort of our traditional sources of energy. Renewables constitute a wide variety of different kinds of things that can be reproduced, from things like wind or biofuels and things of that nature that are either sort of permanent or can be regenerated.
Biofuels are?
Things like ethanol.
Okay, and we're going to get into ethanol too in a minute, because if you're anywhere near my age, you remember a lot of talk of ethanol and all of that going on. We don't hear as much anymore. I'm curious where that's going. Let me ask you, Laura, percentage-wise, where are we still dependent on what things?
Fossil fuel versus renewable. I mean, we're still extremely dependent on fossil fuels. I mean, renewables are gaining, but really overall it's still a very small percentage of our energy portfolio. And what I think the nation is struggling with, particularly big cities like Houston, is how do we increase those numbers and how do we do it in a way that's diverse? How do we have a diverse energy portfolio? So, for example, the city of Houston does have a diverse energy portfolio. We're the #1 municipal purchaser of renewable energy in the country. 33% of our energy comes from wind farms in Texas, in West Texas. But the rest of our portfolio, obviously, is oil and gas. So how do we help other cities do what we're doing? That's really a question I think we need to start answering.
And David, how does all of this change who we are? As a community today, how have we changed from the past? Have we become more responsible when it comes to energy use?
I think we're an oil and gas city. And just to characterize Houston, Houston is not just the city of Houston, it's the Houston region. It's a larger and sometimes extending on to the Gulf Coast area. I think who we are is largely currently about the fossil fuel industry. I think the citizenry gets that there's going to be some transition. I think most people are well aware of that there are alternatives to what we're doing today. I think businesses are in the same situation. While major oil and gas companies don't talk about all the things that they're doing, in fact, they are doing a lot of things in terms of what that future energy. They want to be in that business too. They're all trying to figure out a strategy to do that. So you see large oil companies involved in batteries. You see large oil companies involved in biodiesel and algae development and production. So we're all investing in that kind of future.
And I will just add, though, I mean, if you look at Texas's wind production, for example, which was highlighted in the episode last night, I mean, we are the #1 producer of wind energy in the country, our state. We have 3 times as much wind production as the second state.
And we're the 6th in the world.
It's 6th in the world, exactly. I mean, it's phenomenal. And if you also remember the stats, people do think that by 2050, 20% of our energy may come from wind. So we're going in the right direction, and I think Houston, we were a leader, a century ago in oil and gas, and I think now's the time for us to exert our leadership in what really are starting to be new green technologies.
But is it so, ask Craig this, is it still a dirty word to talk about in Houston about these renewable energies, or has Houston caught up with this?
Well, I think Houston has definitely caught up. As was just noted, I think that the energy companies themselves are looking to the future as well. They realize that traditional fossil fuels are going to be very important for a long time to come, but they're realizing for a variety of reasons, environmental, economic, et cetera, that there's going to be a transition in the future towards these sorts of things, and as a result, they're more understanding and amenable to those things.
Are we running out of fossil fuels? A lot of the talk, especially in the documentary, was about what it's doing to the environment. Mm-hmm. And my curiosity is, it took so long to make what we have. Mm-hmm. As we run out of it, isn't this automatically just going to have to change over anyway? Or is it not at a crisis point?
Well, I mean, this is a matter of huge controversy. There's almost religious fervor over people believe that there's peak oil on the one hand, that we're on the verge of running out, and then on the other hand, that there are folks that believe that we have resources for a considerable period of time. And part of the problem is you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you haven't found. And a lot of the peak oil is based on the idea of, well, how does individual oil fields behave, for example? How does their production taper off over time? But that doesn't really take into account about the things that we haven't found yet and the things we haven't even looked for yet. You'll read all sorts of dire predictions about imminent running out of oil, but we've heard those for many years, and they haven't turned out true yet.
But should we be then concerned more about environmental issues that come with using the fossil fuels? Is that where whether or not there's global warming, the show definitely sets up an understanding that there is global warming, but whether you buy into that or not, simply the fact that burning fossil fuels is bad to the environment, correct? Is that a safe assumption to make? Oh, Laura, you're kind of smiling on that one.
I would say it's a safe assumption. I would go back to the peak oil debate. It is a huge debate, absolutely. People think we're nearing the halfway point of our oil production or oil usage and supply. Other people obviously debate that, but I think that what isn't debated is that since the Industrial Revolution and since populations in our world population have increased, and they're just increasing by huge amounts every single year, I think people do realize that we are using more resources faster than we ever have, and I think that has to factor into how we view the future.
And on petroleum, I think it's important to understand that how we use petroleum. We don't use petroleum to generate electricity. We use petroleum for transportation. Our transportation system is almost exclusively reliant on petroleum. And so you introduced a whole set of issues. Is the environmental issue about petroleum the biggest one? In the Houston area, refineries and petrochemical plants are certainly a concern that's here that doesn't exist in other cities. So it's a challenge for us to address that as a part of our economy. The other piece of it is by far, I think, fuel price swings are more harmful than some of the environmental issues. In addition to that, we go to war. We have a defense program that to some extent is related to petroleum. And electricity is a different issue. The way we use electricity and natural gas are different than the way we use petroleum.
And just to go to the military, if I understand correctly, the military uses 300,000 barrels of oil a day?
They say they're the largest single user, but they're a huge organization, so they do. And it costs them $300 a gallon to get diesel into a battlefield situation. They're very interested in alternative fuels.
And they're actually making a very big move toward using alternative fuel. And alternative and renewable, explain the difference between them, because we've been using them in the office all week, and someone said, no, they're not interchangeable. Alternative is what, and renewable is what?
Well, alternative fuels are alternatives to petroleum, and that's as it's defined in the Energy Policy Act that was adopted back in the 1990s, but even prior to that. So the national goal has been, the state goal has been to reduce our consumption of petroleum-based fuels. So alternative fuels are alternative to petroleum. Renewable fuels are those that are made from sources that can be renewed. Using crops, using non-food crops, we have production plants here in the Houston area that produce tens of thousands of gallons of biodiesel that's made from animal fat or chicken fat or other biological processes, soy and other byproducts.
And then throw in sustainable fuels. What are those? The same as alternatives, renewables, sustainables. Where does sustainable fall in?
Well, to some extent, sustainable is about renewability, but it's also has other implications. high-priced fuels impact low-income households more strongly than others. So sustainability also includes some other factors that we don't normally look at. They fall outside of what we think of as the traditional environmental arena. So sustainability incorporates a whole lot of other principles in addition to what we might think of in terms of traditional environmental issues. It's a much bigger umbrella.
And we've brought up now, once again, ethanol. Let's talk a little bit about where ethanol is in this whole thing. I'll start with you, Craig.
Well, I mean, ethanol is another huge controversy in large part because, first of all, it's heavily subsidized. Second of all, there are some, serious questions about its real viability as a fuel. And particularly, most importantly, perhaps recently, is the growing recognition that to the extent that it is based on food crops, so corn-based ethanol, for example, it does have a big impact on the price of food, which is of particular concern in poorer countries around the world. And so when you look a very large fraction of the U.S. corn crop, for example, going to produce ethanol, that has implications for the price of corn. I mean, I grew up in the upper Midwest, and the kind of prices that we're seeing for corn right now are just sort of mind-boggling. And so that's, I think for the long-term viability, it's going to have to be that ethanol is going to have to be produced from non-food sources.
Yeah. I also think that one other argument against particularly corn ethanol is that it does take, there's been studies that show that it takes, almost more energy to actually make the ethanol than it, and so you're actually using more energy to create a supposed renewable energy. So that's been a big concern, particularly in the environmental community.
A few years back, we had a big conversation in our office about algae and using algae, and that there was an algae farm right outside of Houston where this was going to be the future. Where is that all?
Exxon is actually doing research in algae. NASA has been doing some research in algae. I think it's a technology that we should definitely continue to research and spend time looking to see if we can make it work. There's some studies out there that say it actually can work, but can we make it commercially viable? With all these renewable technologies, that's very much the concern. How do you produce this energy on a commercially mass scale? And that's been the problem.
What is the most commercially viable alternative fuel, alternative energy source?
I think wind is.
Wind?
Yeah.
As a transportation fuel, probably natural gas. We in fact use ethanol as the leading alternative fuel that we use in this country, partially because we subsidize it heavily, both through the agricultural industry and through the production end of things. So.
And there was something else that I was reading recently, and there was all this talk about drilling sheetrock to get natural gas out of it. If I got that right?
Shale.
No?
Shale.
Shale.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that has essentially revolutionized the gas industry in the United States. I mean, so for example, if you go back 2005, 2006, you look at the prices of natural gas and all the plans that were made to import natural gas in liquefied form into the United States. And basically the development of horizontal drilling technologies that have basically made it possible to develop these shale formations have led to a dramatic decline in the price of natural gas. And now people are looking for ways to essentially export natural gas from the United States to the rest of the world. So it's been transformative. And the question is, one question is whether that technology will be viable elsewhere. For example, they're looking in Poland and Ukraine and other places as a way of increasing natural gas production.
Okay, so with all of those on the table, all of these ideas, all those concepts, now let's bring it home. What does this mean for the Houston environment? And for the environment and also for the economy of Houston, both. What are we looking at?
Well, for Houston, I think Houston is uniquely positioned to be a leader on these issues. I mean, we are considered the oil and gas or the energy capital of the world. And I know the mayor absolutely has said she wants us to be considered the renewable energy capital of the world. We have the resources here. We have the people. We have research institutions. We have capital. We have the tools that we need to kind of explode on the scene. And with all this information out there, constantly coming into our inboxes, I think we really can start to transform how Houston deals with its energy policy, how it talks about energy efficiency, how it talks about transportation. Obviously, this is a car city, and as Mayor Parker said last night, if we're going to be a car city, let's make sure we're using non-polluting and new technologies for our cars, such as electric cars. When we talk about companies that are investing in renewable technologies, alternative technologies, NRG has made, they're a huge energy company, they've made a huge investment in electric vehicle technology for Houston. I mean, we were the first city that they were able to announce a $10 million investment in our city to put electric vehicle charging stations in. That will help transform the market. And if Houston can do it, other cities can do it. That's why it's so important for us to take a leadership role, because people do not think of us as a leader on green initiatives, but that's going to change.
There are so many people, though, that work in the oil and gas industry in Houston. Should they be fearful? Should they worry this is the end of their careers?
I really don't think so. I mean, the human capital is here. Energy is a very complex system, and there are a lot of different moving parts to it. And essentially, we have sort of an existing infrastructure and particularly an existing base of human capital that is going to be essential to making these sorts of transitions. So I think overall we're in a very good position in Houston, and also fossil fuels, particularly for transportation fuels, are going to be around for a long time. So I don't think that people have to be in imminent fear of something happening to their livelihood right now.
I think there's so many components of the oil and gas industry that are sort of invisible to most of us. We think of maybe oil and gas as going out and getting new product. Well, there is a lot more to it. There's the upstream or the downstream end of the industry. We're heavily involved in pipeline. We're involved in manufacturing our products. We have an incredible array of intelligence in terms of legal capabilities as well as engineering capabilities. And the question will be, will those same businesses transition to a different kind of energy future? And some of them will, and some of them won't. That we'll see play out over time because of the uncertainties that are associated with future fuels.
Yeah, and people shouldn't be scared. They should be excited about the future, and that the fact that Houston has all of these resources, has all of these many people with all these talents. I mean, these energy companies, as was noted earlier, they are starting to look at these renewables in very serious ways, and so they want to use the resources they have to help Houston be a leader in more than just oil and gas. And so I think, for example, when you talk about pipelines and transmission, well, there's a huge issue right now with renewables entering our transmission and distribution system and in essence, clogging up the system. Well, there are lots of brilliant people who know how to fix that right here in the city that are doing that, for example, for wind energy. So I think people should be excited. I don't think people should be scared.
There are the wind farms that are out west, and they talk about West Texas. They've got a lot of the wind farms. Are we in control of any of that? Have we missed the boat on that? What does the city of Houston have to do with these wind farms?
Well, the city of Houston, as I said earlier, we're the #1 purchaser of renewable energy in the country, and we purchase 33% of our energy from wind farms in Texas. So we have not missed the boat at all. We have partnered.
But we're buying it. But do we have ownership of
We
this?
do not. We're one of the cities in Texas that unfortunately we don't have any energy assets. We don't have any power assets. Austin and San Antonio, they have energy assets. They have public utilities, so they have revenue. They have ratepayers. Unfortunately, Houston does not have that. We do have to buy our energy from other places, but we're trying to do it in the most environmentally and economically beneficial way. And for us, that was utilizing wind farms in Texas. Now, do we want to try to expand and see if we can own and operate some small things like some small solar arrays? We are looking at that. But for right now, unfortunately, we really don't have any power assets, so it does tie our hands a little bit because we're not as able to do as many creative things because we really don't have any revenue coming from any energy assets.
Right. Nuclear comes onto the picture, especially with what happened in Japan recently, and it gives it a very bad slant. People are looking very negatively at nuclear because of what just happened. Overall, should we be worried about the development of nuclear power down the road? Should this be something, is this just a glitch, a mistake, a bad moment for it, or do we really have to re-examine once again how we're looking at nuclear?
Well, in Pudd'nhead Wilson, he talks about the cat that won't sit on a hot stove after he sat on one once, but he won't sit on a cold stove either. and that the important thing is to just learn in a lesson what's in it. The important thing about things like what's happened in Japan is not to overgeneralize. I mean, so talking about 1960s nuclear technology located, essentially in a tsunami zone. I mean, that's one set of lessons, and it's important not to overgeneralize from that. So we have to consider new technologies and also sensible siting of nuclear technology. That said, I think that the industry still has huge hurdles to overcome, not least of which is disposal of waste, for example. And so, this might be sort of if not the death knell, certainly a big setback for the industry, and I don't really consider it to be a likely major source for our electricity going forward.
I think Japan sort of presents two new barriers. One is the financial community. Will nuclear plants be financed? I think that's a big question. Whether the federal government now is willing to underwrite the risk that's associated with that, I think now is a big question. In the public sector, I think it's a huge question. We remember Exxon Valdez. We remember 3 Mile Island. Regardless of the damages, regardless of how long that lasted, it becomes a lasting moment in our decisions and our support or opposition to nuclear power.
Should that be how we're looking at it? From where you folks sit, should it be a viable option, or are these concerns real?
In my view, I mean, the price signals are sort of distorted. For example, supporting the government essentially absorbing the liability. If it can stand on its own and people are willing to underwrite the risk, I think that's fine. I don't think that they would be absent some sort of government support. So, I just don't really see it being that viable going forward economically, standing on its own 2 feet, paying all of its own costs.
Laura, how does the city feel about it? Do we know?
The city wants to work on, having a diverse portfolio. And when it comes to sort of national energy policy, I mean, nuclear has always been on the table. It's very controversial in the environmental community. Some support it, some don't. And so I think, sort of putting it completely off the table is probably not the right thing to do, but not spending that much time on it right now, I think is the right thing. I think our energy would be better spent in focusing on other technologies.
In the documentary, once again, back to the documentary, they talk often about 2030. I'm curious how all of you folks see in the year 2030 where we will be from what you know, from what you see going on, from our own neighborhood. What's going to happen?
I think we're going to be more towards natural gas related. I think that's going to be sort of our staple fuel in 2030, supplemented by a variety of renewables.
I think we're going to see a huge amount of electric cars on the road. I think you're going to see buildings, you're going to see LEED standards and Energy Star standards that are actually not special anymore, but they're going to be codes. So you're going to see green buildings are going to be sort of required, and they're not going to be considered special. And the city's taking a lead on that right now. Houston is actually 6th in the country for the number of LEED buildings that we have. So we are more and more being seen as a leader in green building. You're going to see energy efficiency improvements again as required, but you're really going to a lot of these things that we talk about right now as unique, or you're sort of ahead of the curve, are going to be commonplace. And you're going to see solar is going to make an increase. Wind, a lot of these renewables are going to be much higher percentages than we see today.
David?
Well, I think looking back, even changes 10 years ago, it's not hard to see that things that have become a part of our life that change the way that we behave, the way that we travel. We carry cell phones, we communicate by computers now, we can hold meetings remotely, and there are trips that we don't make anymore in terms of the impact on transportation. So the future, what does that hold in store? 3D meetings certainly are doable today. A lot of the technologies today would be transformative if they were widely applied. Green buildings are a part of our lives right now. They don't even have to be called green buildings now. They become high-performance buildings. The next generation of buildings become even higher performance building. What do we call those? Green buildings, maybe that's the wrong color. We're already doing a lot of things. So 2030, it's not hard to imagine a different future in terms of the way we use energy, not necessarily the visibility of all of that. I think our cities will continue to look like what they are today pretty much, but the way we use energy will be substantially different.
Simply doing what we do today in a more efficient manner, they say, can save us a third of what we're using. So simply cleaning up our lives and doing things in a more efficient manner would help with the situation. What are things people can do right now at home to become involved in this and moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. They can weatherize their homes today. I mean, the city of Houston has spent $57 million, 5.1 million square feet of office space, over 80 buildings to make our buildings more energy efficient. We're paying that money back through the utility savings because we're seeing such a drop in reduction in our energy usage, and so therefore our costs go down. We want residents to do that. I mean, you can call up your utility and they will come out and do an assessment for free for the most part. And then you can make those improvements and you will see such a dropped reduction in your energy bill literally in the next month. I mean, we have a residential energy efficiency program for certain residents that meet the requirements in Houston. They see, when we go doing the improvements, they see a reduction in their bill, $50 to $100 a month, the next month. We want Houstonians to do that across the board.
And we're going to wrap up right there on that cheerleading note, and we hope everyone does take your advice there. Thank you all for coming in. Now, each week, we invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Simply click on the local programs bar, pick Houston 8, and you can join our online community. Read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Now, next week on Houston 8, we'll be discussing bringing gambling to the Lone Star State. If you have a question or comment to share with us on that topic, feel free to email us at Houston8@HoustonPBS.org. That does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Have a great week.